Good morning to all of you and welcome to the EEB's 2020 annual conference. Our EEB President, Johanna Sandahl, is going to open the conference. Johanna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Patrizia. Dear friends, it's a real pleasure to welcome you all to the EEB annual conference. My name is Johanna Sandahl and I'm the President of the EEB. 32 years ago, about a third of a century ago, in the year 1988, thousands of dead seals floated ashore the coast of Sweden. The Great Seal Death had struck the Baltic Sea, and the environmental debate was a fact. And in the parliamentary election that year, the Green Party entered the Swedish parliament for the first time. I was 14 years old and very worried and upset about the death of the seals, and a lot of other things had happened around me. Only 2 years earlier, two major events had shaken Sweden. Prime Minister Olof Palme had been shot dead in the open, and only a few months later, the serious reactor accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant took place, after which radioactive particles spread to large parts of Sweden and other parts of Europe. George H.W. Bush won the US election, and during his presidency, the Kuwait War would dominate much of the news reporting. In 1988, the EEB had been fighting for environmental issues for 14 years, but it wasn't until now or then that the European Council conclusions for the first time mentioned sustainable development. Only a few years later, things looked a bit brighter. George H.W. Bush and Boris Yeltsin formally declared that the Cold War was over. The Berlin Wall had been torn down. The Velvet Revolution had overthrown the dictatorship in Czechoslovakia, and the Baltic countries had become independent states. From an idea that originally came from the Swedish Society for Nature Conservation, the world's first carbon dioxide tax had been introduced in Sweden. After 20 years of hard work, the white-tailed eagle was no longer threatened, and the lynx had been protected. And not the least, in Rio de Janeiro, the world's nations gathered for the United Nations Conference on Environmental Development, the Earth Summit. And I remember that I was thinking, it's happening now. We can change the world. But 32 years later, I think it's relevant to ask yourself if it was really then it happened. Well, in a way, it was not. All the nice words, visions, and goals that were the result of the Rio conference have in fact not become reality. But seen from another perspective, it was then it happened. It was one big event, together with other big and small events, that contributed to the beginning of a change. Just as the small and big actions that happen today around Europe and the rest of the world together makes a big difference. The thought of it's happening now gives me a lot of energy. And today, I'm absolutely convinced that it is now it's happening. The world is changing. 93% of EU citizens see climate change as a serious problem. The knowledge about biodiversity and the willingness to protect it is growing constantly. People's awareness about the problems our lifestyles are causing is growing stronger and stronger. When the World Economic Forum compiles the most serious global risks to society, the list is dominated by environmental problems, such as extreme weather events, natural disasters, biodiversity loss, and the collapse of ecosystems. The insight is there, but also the power of action. The world's nations have agreed on the Paris Agreement. Agenda 2030, with its 17 global goals, has been established. And in city after city and country after country, plans are being developed to make sure the agenda becomes a reality. Even in EU politics, or one can say especially in EU politics, there is clearly something going on. With the European Green Deal, the possibility to meet the great challenges we face is far better than just a few years ago. And the fact that the commitment to the Green Deal seems to have held through the pandemic, morphing into an insistence on a green recovery, is to be welcomed. But of course, a still a lot needs to happen. Fine words and ideas that we can find in the European Green Deal need to be turned into very specific and concrete policies in many different areas. So far, almost 1 year on, we've seen some positive results with the biodiversity strategy for 2030 and the chemical strategy for sustainability, whereas the farm to fork strategy and the circular economy action plan 2.0 have been of mixed quality, and the industry strategy and climate law proposals have been disappointing. Of particular concern is the direction of the CAP negotiations, which is out of line with the EGD objectives. We're still missing a sustainable development strategy for the EU in line with the 2030 agenda to serve as the compass for environmental, social, and economic policies, as well as governance. The gap between the rich and the poor in the EU is widening. More and more people do not earn enough to make a living. Minorities and migrants often live at the margins of our societies. And according to Eurostat, the EU is falling behind in achieving, for example, SDG 5 on gender equality. There is much work to do, and we will hear in the coming hours many ideas of what the priorities should be. While our particular focus is on European policies, Europe does not exist in a vacuum. A sustainable Europe, if such could be achieved, would mean little in an unsustainable world. Collaboration with countries outside of Europe and success in international negotiations, such as the climate and biodiversity negotiations, is of crucial importance. While the dust has yet to settle on the US election, the likely inauguration of President Biden in January suggests that the worst has been avoided and that the world's richest economy will no longer be led by a climate-denying president. These challenges strengthen my strong belief in the incredible importance of the civil society and the environmental movement. What an important force we are for the environmental and societal transition to really happen. Our knowledge about the challenges we face is broad and deep. We've got the ability to see solutions to problems. We have the strength to point out what needs to be done from Greece in the south to Norway in the north, and from Ireland in the west to Georgia in the east. A force that strengthens and defends the democracy that is so important for us to change the world. And now we gather here at this year's annual conference and the EEB's annual general meeting. Our way of meeting is very different this time. And while I would have loved to meet you all in person instead of virtually, I still look very much forward to these days with many interesting perspectives and discussions. It's my greatest wish that when we leave the conference today, or for some of us the meeting tomorrow, we do so with a feeling that we together can make sure that it's happening now. The world is changing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Johanna, for putting us in the right frame of mind for the EEB's 2020